What's up YouTube? KS Gun Guy here. Thanks for joining me today as always. If you like what you see here, do be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and there's plenty more content on the way. So I've got for you today another installment of the If I Could Only Have One series. And in this series I take a look at two firearms, whether very similar or in some cases very different, and I compare and contrast them. We take a look at a couple of the specs, although not a deep dive into these guns. We look at the features, and in this particular video it will be feature rich for sure. I'll be wheeling in, shooting along the way. We'll take a look at the triggers and the shootability of the firearms, and at the end I will announce a winner. But here's the thing, both of these guns are fantastic, and it doesn't necessarily mean that one is really better than the other. I think that's in the eye of the beholder, but I think it's also fun to take a step back and look at your collection and challenge yourself every once in a while. If I could only have one gun, which one would it be? And so that's really the premise of this video. So for this, I've got the Glock 19 and the CZ P-10C, and I know some of the viewers out there are probably saying, well, KS, you've done this before. You did a Glock 19 and the CZ P-10C, and I did. It's true. However, I was using the Vickers Tactical Glock, the earlier release from this year, and a lot of people questioned that that was not a stock Glock. And I think that's really fair. And to a large degree, I agree with what you guys were saying with that. There was a lot of feedback there. So it's a great opportunity to revisit these because Glock just came out with the Generation 5, so I've got that Generation 5 19 in front of us, and we're kind of level setting the playing field a little bit because both of these guns are not only new this year, but from an aftermarket support standpoint, both of them are relatively equal now because of all the internal changes with the Glock. So again, it's a great time to revisit these guys and see if my feeling is the same. In the previous video, the Glock 19 actually did win just by a hair for a couple of different reasons. I'd encourage you to go back and watch that video and take a look at my assessment of those two at the time. So from a spec standpoint, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on specs because that would take a large amount of time there. But by and large, the CZ P-10C is just a tiny bit larger in scope, whether it be height or length, that sort of thing. The only place where it's just a little bit smaller is really actually in the width. The width on the P-10C is 1.26 inches versus 1.34 inches on the Glock 19. However, from a weight standpoint, the CZ is just a couple of ounces heavier, 26 ounces versus 24 on the Glock 19. So generally speaking, the P-10C is just a little bit bigger. So from a feature standpoint, here's where we can spend a fair amount of time on this video for sure. Now both of these guns do have 15 round magazines. However, the CZ does have a steel 15 round magazine. It comes with two out of the box. From a grip standpoint, a lot of people have said that the grip texture on the CZ P-10C is almost overly aggressive, not quite, and I would say that's largely true. I think it's comfortable enough. It's not going to beat you up or anything like that. However, if you shoot it a few hundred rounds at the range, whatever, you might walk away with a little bit of grip texture on your hands. Again, I think it's still very comfortable, but I think they've done a good job of making sure that your purchase and your grip stays very well planted while shooting. Now, it does have adjustable back straps. You can actually remove this, and it comes with three, small, medium, large, like mini guns out there. The grip texture is kind of pointed pyramids on the front and the back straps, and then on the sides, it's more subdued squares. Now the contour of the grip, I think CZ did a fantastic job. They've done a good job of undercutting the trigger guard here a little bit and making sure it's very smooth and scalloped there to make sure you get a really nice purchase on that. Now, one thing I've noted in the previous video and several previous videos, the contour of the back of the frame here can kind of beat you up a little bit. If you're shooting 300-400 rounds, whatever it happens to be, it can kind of hit you in the knuckle. But that's just barely, and that depends on your particular hand. Mine, it does a little bit. Although I noted in my last shooting adventure with this, so to speak, with the Glock, it really wasn't quite as bad. So it's still very much a pleasure to shoot for sure. They did carry the grip texture up on the frame, so you've got some nice reference points for either your finger or your thumb, depending on how you shoot. I think that's a really nice addition as well. And of course, it does have an accessory rail for your lights, lasers, grenade launchers, that sort of thing. So from an overall frame standpoint, I think CZ did a really good job. Now, from an ambidextrous standpoint, it is 100% ambidextrous out of the box. In other words, it does have a magazine release on both sides, as well as a slide lock or slide release, whatever you want to say, out of the box as well. Also noted in previous videos that both of these features were pretty stiff as the gun was new. Now an update to that is these have definitely come into their own, and they are much easier to use, whether it be with loaded magazines, unloaded magazines, whatever it is. So I think the CZ just needed a little bit of time and a little bit of break-in to make these very comfortable and usable controls. From a takedown standpoint, it's very similar to the Glock. You have your two tabs. You do have to pull the trigger. But once you do, you take the slide back just a little bit, pull your tabs, and the slide comes off. And it's the same components you would expect in most striker-fired firearms. I'm not going to take it apart in this particular video. Now, from a frame standpoint with the Glock 19 Gen 5, there are certainly some notable changes on there. One thing they did do, they did remove the grip grooves or grooves, finger grooves, whatever you want to say. And some people have said that's fantastic and a welcome addition. Some people don't care, and some people said, I like the grooves. So it's kind of hit or miss. You're going to have your fans either way. From a magazine perspective, once again, 15-round magazine, just like the CZ. Now, it does come with 3. Now, it is a polymer magazine with the steel insert. You'll notice that the follower is now orange. However, the CZ also does have a colored follower, as do many of the other manufacturers, so I don't consider this really an upgrade or an enhancement, just a change to the magazine, but might be easier from a visibility standpoint. And then they recontoured the butt of the magazine to go along with some of the other grip features I'll cover here in just a moment. However, your old magazines will work, so you don't have to worry about getting all new magazines or anything like that. All your previous generation magazines will function just fine. I'm going to leave that out here for just a moment or two. As I said a moment ago, a couple of other changes. One other thing they did flare out a mag well on the grip, which I actually really like. I think it's a really nice welcome addition. Now it does make the grip just a little bit wider. I had a couple people in the comments in my previous video on this suggest that it might make printing a little bit more of a possibility if you're concealed carrying, and that may be true. Although I think it's relatively subdued, so hopefully it won't be too much of an impact on that printing. But they also made the interior of that magwell more flared as well for easier magazine insertion. Now you'll also notice that there is a little bit, I'm going to try and tilt this a little bit better here, there's a bit of a scallop in the front part of the grip right there. And they did that, again, for the magazine to be able to rip magazines out just a little bit easier if you have to clear a malfunction. So I'm not necessarily a fan of that, although it doesn't really take away from the gun, which is good. Now, you do have back straps like you would expect in a Generation 4, so you still have a variety of different ways to make this grip just a little bit more comfortable for you. So I'm glad they kept that feature if back straps are important to you. The Glock 19 still has an accessory rail for your lights, lasers, grenade launchers, so that feature is still there. Now it's still the proprietary rail, and some people kind of boo on that, but most accessories have been made for that, so I don't think it's really that much of an impact. They did do a little bit more of an undercut here in the trigger guard, underneath the trigger guard, and I think it's barely noticeable. I've never really been bothered by Glock knuckle, so to speak, but I know that's a really important feature to some people, so I'd be curious to know as you start experiencing this gun if it is a significant change or not. So, because I haven't really noticed it to be the case. Now, from an ambidextrous standpoint, it is still only half ambidextrous from a magazine release standpoint. You do still have to flip that around, but at least you do have that option, which is good. However, an enhancement or a change that's been made, it is now fully ambidextrous from your slide lock, slide release standpoint. So it is really a left-handed friendly gun, and I've had quite a few comments cheering that, which is great. So for you lefties out there, it's ready to go out of the box. From a takedown standpoint, it is still the standard tabs as you would expect. You do have to pull the trigger, of course, and then you'll pop the slide off. Same internals that you would always expect. However, the internals have changed quite a bit, at least from their previous iterations of the Glock, so your aftermarket parts aren't going to work as well. Be sure to check out the video from last week on the Generation 5s to cover that in more detail. So that's really it from a frame standpoint with both of these guns. So we'll go ahead and talk about the slides here for just a moment or two and then get to some shooting. From a slide perspective on the P-10C, we do have front and back serrations, and I think it's a welcome feature for this gun for sure. And they are very usable. They're pretty grippy for sure. And the contour of the slide is really nice. I think CZ did a good job of making this a very good-looking gun. From a sights perspective, you do get steel sights out of the box. Now these are 3-dot phosphorescent sights. They do glow for a period of time. You do have to charge them with ambient light, and that's fantastic for range use and that sort of thing. However, from perhaps a home defense or concealed carry standpoint, I don't think they do a lot of good because either the house is going to be dark or you're going to be wearing this under clothes, so it's not going to be able to have the opportunity to charge. But at least you do get steel sights out of the box, which is fantastic. Now with the Glock, they have changed the coating on this. It's an NDLC coating, so the finish is just a little bit different than what you can expect in previous generations. I find it to be a little bit slick, but I think it's a good-looking coating, if nothing else. It does only have rear serrations. Now, some people have balked at the fact that this did not have front serrations like the 4.5 version, whatever you want to call it, from earlier this year. I'm a little bit disappointed. I would have liked to have seen those serrations. Is it a big deal? Is it the end of the world? Absolutely not. But they did it once. They might as well just keep doing it and have that feature there. From a sight perspective, this still comes with the plastic U-notch or field goal sights. However, Glock is going to, I'm not sure if they're doing it quite yet, but they're going to offer several different models, one of which will have steel U-dot or U-notch sights rather. They'll have a Glock factory night sight and then an Ameriglow night sight version of this. So a couple of different options to select when you're purchasing this, so you don't have to purchase aftermarket sights, which is kind of nice if that's something important to you. One other change that they did make to the slide, they did actually contour the front of the slide to make it a little bit more like a Glock 26. Once again, I think it's a welcome change, at least from an aesthetic standpoint. I think it looks just a little bit better. Now, they say that it's just easier to insert in a holster than it was in previous generations. Well, your mileage may vary there. I'm not so sure that that's necessarily true, but at least I think it looks a little bit better. So a lot of features going on with both of these guns. Now, of course, again, we're going to take a look at some shooting here in a moment. When we come back, we're going to take a look at both of these triggers. We might measure them a couple of times, see how they stack up, and then we will announce a winner. So stay tuned. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that footage at the range. From a shooting perspective, both of these guns are absolutely fantastic shooters. They're reasonably flat. They feel good in the hand. I think they both do a great job. They're as accurate as I think you can be with a handgun for sure. Certainly more accurate than I am. But again, they both shot very well. Now, it took me a little bit longer to warm up to the CZ because it's been a little while since I've shot it. But once I settled in, I was able to really kind of assess where it stands, so to speak, at least stacked up against the Glock in my hands. And of course your mileage may vary there. But both of them definitely feel really good in the hand. I think it's easy to get a good purchase. They both have a reasonably low bore axis if that's important to you, and they just shoot really, really well. A Glock being basically the same, again, at least for my hands, feeling very good. Let's go ahead and take a look at the triggers of both of these guns and see how these guys stack up from that perspective. A lot of people have really touted the CZ as being one of the better triggers on the market, and I must say, I really agree. I think it's a fantastic trigger. Now, although it does have the safety dingus, just like the Glock does, they've kind of molded or sculpted this to be a little bit more flat. Now, it's not really a traditionally flat trigger, although I think it is a little bit more so. So from an uptake standpoint, it's incredibly smooth. Now, there's a fair amount of uptake there. It's not the shortest trigger by any stretch of the imagination, but again, it's incredibly smooth and very easy to articulate. And then you get to a nice defined wall, and there's your break, and it's a really nice, light, crisp snap. And then from a reset standpoint, really short reset, light and crisp. It's certainly audible and tactile. And then we get back out to the start. And I'll go ahead and do that again. So again, there's our uptake, our wall, there's our break, and there's our reset. Again, absolutely fantastic trigger. I think CZ did a really good job of making this a good quality trigger out of the box. Again, no work has been done to this whatsoever. It's just been shot. Now the Glock, although the trigger has changed dramatically from an overall construction standpoint, I think the trigger basically feels pretty much the same. Now the safety plunger is a ramped safety plunger rather than a round one, so I think that does help just a little bit. Some people have said that it feels more like there's a different connector in there. I don't necessarily think that's true because I think there is still a defined wall in there. We do have our uptake. Now it is shorter uptake than the CZ P-10C, but once we get to that wall, there's that break, and I'll tell you, I think it feels just like most any other Glocks out there, just my opinion. And then we get to our reset, and there's our reset right there, and back out to the start. And of course, I'll do that again. And that reset, again, very standard Glock. I mean, I think Glocks have, I think they have great triggers, and I think they're very predictable for sure. So once again, our uptake, reasonably short, our wall, and there's our break, and then our reset and back out to the start. Again, I think it feels pretty much like any Glock trigger out there, although perhaps it's slightly better than previous generations. I think it's a pretty marginal. Now, one thing to note with the trigger, it is a flat-faced trigger now. It's not really flat like the P-10 is, but flat-faced versus serrated. So if that's something that's important to you, that's a nice enhancement there. I've had a couple people in the comments say that when they're shooting with the tips of their fingers or the pad of their finger, and if you watch my channel, you know I don't. I actually wrap my finger through. My fingers are just a little bit too long. But at the end of the day, from a trigger perspective, I think both of these triggers are fantastic. I actually do prefer the CZ just a little bit, especially now that it's broken in a little bit more. Time will tell on the Glock, so I can't give CZ too much of a leg up for that, but a little bit. But now comes the end of the video, and again, it's if I could only have one, so I have to decide a winner. And I have to say, guys, that's been quite a challenge because I've done this before with the Glock Vickers Tactical, and the Glock actually won the last time I did it. But things maybe have changed just a little bit for a couple of reasons. First, I've gotten to know the CZ just a little bit better, and the Glock, feels basically pretty much the same with a couple of changes. I won't say enhancements, but changes. But again, both fantastic guns. And Glocks, I'll tell you, I have a special place in my heart for Glocks. I've always enjoyed them. I've always had a lot of fun shooting them. I think they're great guns. I think they're certainly reliable. The aftermarket support has always been very enjoyable because I like tinkering with Glocks. Now, of course, it changes a little bit with the Gen 5. Time will tell how that aftermarket reacts to that, but it kind of means that there really isn't a whole lot of tinkering to do. You just have a gun, you got to shoot it out of the box. The CZ P-10C, however, has really kind of, now it hasn't changed the landscape of guns by any stretch of the imagination. It didn't reinvent anything. However, for a freshman offering from CZ, at least for this particular platform, I think they really kind of hit a home run, so to speak. I think they put together a really good quality firearm that feels good in the hand. It shoots well. It's been certainly reliable, and I think it really looks good too. Even with an FDE frame on a Glock, to me, you know, Glocks are just kind of Glocks, and they're fine and they're decent looking, but I think the CZ P-10C definitely looks good. So again, at the end of the day, if I could only have one, I would choose the CZ P-10C. Now, like I've said before, both of these are fantastic firearms, but I think CZ really knocked a home run out of the park by putting together a good-looking gun, a gun that feels good in the hand. It's fun to shoot. It's got a lot of the features and the qualities that you look for in a striker-fired firearm, and you get them out of the box for roughly $500. Now, that's not to say that the Glock isn't a great gun. It is. I love Glocks, and I think they've done a good job with the changes that have been made with the Gen 5. A couple of things I would have liked to have been done different, but who am I to judge? But at around $550 or $600, especially with the polymer sights, that's certainly a knock I have to give Glock. I just have to say that the CZ, for me, is the gun that I would take if I could only have one. So be sure to leave a comment on this. I'm really excited to read if you guys agree with this or disagree with this, what you would have chosen, of course. If you've got suggestions for other comparison videos, be sure to leave those as well. So I'm really looking forward to reading those. And once again, thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.